How did a simple breakfast end with hospital staff rushing down a corridor? And why did that moment change who could stay in my house? What did I see in that ward less than an hour later that made my hands tremble? And how did it lead to a calm, legal blow she never expected? They thought I would back out quietly. I did the opposite. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled my kitchen that Tuesday morning, which should have been pleasant. Instead, it felt like a trap. "Jared, you have to try this," Tessa called from the stove, her voice carrying that forced sweetness I'd grown to recognize over the past 3 months. "I made your favorite, Eggs Benedict with that hollandaise you love." I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, watching my son's girlfriend plate an elaborate breakfast that looked like something from a restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 26 years of raising Evan in this house, I now felt like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. "That's really thoughtful, Tessa, but I can't eat this morning. I have a medical test at 9. I need to fast for 12 hours. She turned from the stove, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light. At 24, Tessa had mastered the art of looking concerned while calculating her next move. "Oh, that's terrible timing. I got up early specifically to make this for you." The guilt trip was immediate and expertly delivered. Evan appeared from the hallway, already dressed for his job at the marketing firm downtown. "Dad, she's been planning this all week. Can't you reschedule?" "The test is for my annual physical. It's already scheduled." I kept my voice level, but something cold was settling in my chest. In my own house, I was explaining why I couldn't eat food I hadn't asked for. Tessa's expression shifted subtly, the concern melting into something harder. "You know, Jared, sometimes I feel like you go out of your way to reject anything I do for this family." Family. The word landed hard. She'd been staying here for 3 months while looking for the right apartment with Evan. 3 months of gradually taking over my space, rearranging my furniture, and now apparently deciding what constituted my family. "That's not," I started, but Evan cut me off. "She's trying to do something nice, Dad. The least you could do is appreciate the effort." I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he started talking like this? When had he started defending someone else's feelings over basic reality? The Evan I'd raised would have understood that medical requirements weren't personal rejections. "Tell you what," I said, moving toward the counter. "Lumi works nights at General Hospital. She's probably exhausted after her shift. I'll take this to her. She'd appreciate a home-cooked meal." Tessa's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, then forced brightness. "Oh, you don't need to bother, Mom. She usually just grabs something from the hospital cafeteria. It's no bother. I'm heading that direction anyway for my test." I reached for the plate, but Tessa's hand shot out to stop me. "Actually, maybe we should just put it in the fridge. Mom's probably already eaten." The resistance was immediate and telling. Why wouldn't she want her mother to have a nice breakfast? Unless— "I insist," I said calmly, lifting the plate. "Lumi works hard. She deserves something special." Evan stepped between us, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Dad, you're being weird about this. Just leave it alone." Being weird. About taking food to a tired nurse. In what universe was that weird? But I didn't argue. I'd learned that arguing with Tessa present meant losing twice, once to her, and once when Evan inevitably took her side afterward. Instead, I carefully covered the plate with foil and headed for the door. "I'll be back after my appointment," I said to the silent kitchen. As I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. A text from Evan. "Don't embarrass her today." I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, staring at those words. Don't embarrass her. Not, "Thanks for being thoughtful to Lumi," or "Hope your test goes well." Just a warning not to embarrass the woman who'd somehow convinced my son that his father was the problem. The clinic visit was routine. Lab tests. Confirmation that yes, I needed to keep fasting until after the tests were finished. The nurse even time-stamped my chart. 7:43 a.m., patient fasting confirmed. By 8:15, I was walking through the staff entrance of General Hospital with Tessa's special breakfast, thinking this might actually be the one good thing to come out of the morning. I should have known better. The changes had been so gradual that I almost missed them. Almost. It started 3 months ago when Evan moved back home temporarily after his lease ended. At 26, he was saving for a house down payment, a smart financial move that I was happy to support. My son had always been responsible, thoughtful, independent. Then Tessa began staying over. First, it was weekends, then a few weeknights. Then suddenly, her toiletries were in the bathroom, her clothes in Evan's closet, and her opinions about how my house should run became daily conversation topics. The living room would look so much better with the couch facing the other direction, she'd mention casually, then act hurt when I didn't immediately rearrange furniture I'd positioned deliberately for the best view of both the TV and the backyard. You know, most people Jared's age are thinking about downsizing, she'd tell Evan, not quite quietly enough. This house is really too big for one person. One person. As if Evan didn't live here, as if she didn't live here, as if I was some aging relative taking up space in what should rightfully be their home. The language shift was the most unsettling part. Evan stopped asking and started informing. We're having dinner with Tessa's friends Friday instead of, would it be okay if we had some people over? We need the living room Sunday for Tessa's study group, instead of, could we use the living room for studying? We think the guest room would make a better office, instead of, what do you think about converting the guest room? We, always we. But the we never included me. At the construction site where I operated crane equipment, I was respected. My 23 years of experience meant something. Younger workers asked my advice. My foreman, Caleb, trusted my judgment on complex lifts. I had authority, competence, value. At home, I was an inconvenience to be managed. Jared leaves his coffee cup in the sink instead of putting it straight in the dishwasher, Tessa would sigh to Evan, as if this was evidence of some deep character flaw rather than a habit I'd maintained successfully for decades. Maybe we should set some boundaries about kitchen cleanup, Evan would suggest, using words that sounded like they came from relationship blogs rather than from the practical young man I'd raised. Boundaries. That became Tessa's favorite word. But somehow, the boundaries only applied to me. I needed to respect their space when they wanted alone time, but they could take over the living room whenever they chose. I needed to communicate better about my schedule, but they could invite people over without asking. I needed to be more flexible about household changes, but any suggestion I made was met with explanations about why it wouldn't work. The breaking point should have been the night I overheard Tessa on the phone in the backyard, talking to someone about the situation. He will move out, she said, her voice carrying through the screen door. He just doesn't know it yet. Evan's starting to see how much easier everything would be without all this tension. Tension. As if I was the one creating problems by existing in my own home. The house is perfect for us, she continued. Great neighborhood, good size, and Evan's already comfortable here. We just need to help Jared realize he'd be happier somewhere smaller, somewhere more appropriate for his stage of life. My stage of life. I was 48 years old, in perfect health, at the peak of my earning potential, and apparently I was being managed toward a retirement home. But even then, I didn't explode. I didn't storm outside and confront her. I didn't immediately demand that she leave. Because I'd learned something important in 23 years of construction work. When someone's setting a trap, the worst thing you can do is spring it for them. Instead, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. And what I saw made me realize that the breakfast incident wasn't going to be an isolated event. It was going to be the opening move in a much larger game. The family dinner at Romano's should have been pleasant. Tessa had suggested it as a way to spend quality time together and work on our communication as a family unit. That phrase, family unit, had become another of her favorites, as if families were corporate structures that needed optimization rather than relationships built on love and history. We were barely seated when Tessa began collecting ammunition. "Jared, tell Mom about your morning routine," she said brightly to Lumi, who looked exhausted after pulling a double shift at the hospital. "He's so set in his ways. Coffee at exactly 6:15, same breakfast every day, same route to work. It's actually kind of sweet how structured he is." The words were positive, but the subtext was clear: rigid, inflexible, resistant to change. "Structure's good," Lumi said diplomatically, but I caught her glancing between Tessa and me with the sharp assessment of someone who'd spent years reading people in crisis situations. "Oh, absolutely," Tessa agreed, "but sometimes I worry that too much routine makes it hard to adapt when life changes. Like this morning, I made this beautiful breakfast, spent an hour on it, and he couldn't even try a bite." "He was fasting for medical tests," Evan said, but his tone suggested this was an excuse rather than a fact. I know, but it's the pattern that concerns me. There's always a reason why something won't work, why change is impossible, why things have to stay exactly the same." Lumi's expression shifted slightly. She was hearing a story about a stubborn old man who refused reasonable accommodations from a thoughtful young woman. "Actually," I said calmly, "I brought the breakfast to you at the hospital. Did you enjoy it?" The question landed like a small bomb. Tessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You..." "What?" Lumi looked confused. "I took the breakfast Tessa made to the hospital for you. Figured you'd appreciate a home-cooked meal after working all night." Tessa recovered quickly. "Oh, that's so sweet, but I told you Mom probably already ate." "Did you eat it?" Lumi asked me directly. "No, I delivered it to the nurses' station. Asked them to make sure you got it when you had a chance." Lumi frowned. "I never got any breakfast, and I would have remembered. I was starving by the end of my shift." The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Tessa jumped in with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "Oh, hospital communication. You know how crazy things get there. It probably just got mixed up with the regular food service." But Lumi was still frowning. "What time did you drop it off?" "Around 8:20. I was at the nurse's station until almost 9. If someone had brought food for me, I would have seen it." Another pause. Evan shifted in his seat, looking between his girlfriend and Lumi with growing confusion. "Well," Tessa said brightly, "the important thing is that Jared was trying to be thoughtful, even if the execution was a little off." Execution was a little off. Somehow my successful delivery of her food had become evidence of my incompetence. That's when she made her mistake. "The thing is," Tessa continued, warming to her theme, "when we take over the house payments, we'll need to establish better systems for..." She stopped abruptly, but it was too late. "When you what?" Lumi's voice was sharp. "I just meant when we're more settled, when we're contributing more to the household." But the damage was done. The slip had revealed the real plan, not just living in my house, but taking it over entirely. Evan was staring at Tessa with an expression I hadn't seen since he was 12 and realized he'd been lied to about something important. "Tessa," he said slowly, "we never talked about taking over house payments." "Well, no, not specifically, but if your dad is thinking about downsizing anyway..." "I never said I was thinking about downsizing." My voice was quiet, but it cut through Tessa's explanation like a blade. All three of them turned to look at me. "I'm 48 years old. I love my house. I've never expressed any desire to move, downsize, or change my living situation, so I'm curious where that idea came from." Tessa's face cycled through several expressions before settling on wounded innocence. "I just thought... I mean, With Evan and me getting more serious, and the house being so big for one person, it's not big for one person. It's exactly right for the person who bought it, maintains it, and lives in it. The temperature at the table dropped about 10 degrees. Evan looked like he wanted to disappear. Lumi was watching the exchange with the focused attention of someone reassessing everything she'd been told. "Dad?" Evan started, but I held up a hand. "Let me be very clear about something," I said, still keeping my voice level. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. You're welcome in it, Evan, always. But I won't be managed, manipulated, or gradually pushed out by someone who's been living there for 3 months. Tessa's eyes filled with tears, perfectly timed, expertly delivered. "I can't believe you think I would manipulate anyone," she whispered. "I've been trying so hard to make this work, to build a relationship with you, and you think I'm some kind of schemer." The tears were good. They put Evan in an impossible position: defend his father's reasonable statement or comfort his crying girlfriend. He chose the girlfriend. "Dad, that's really harsh. Tessa's been nothing but kind to you." "Has she?" The question hung in the air. Because when I really thought about it, when I looked past the surface gestures and examined the actual pattern, kindness wasn't the word I'd use. But I could see I was losing this battle. In public, with emotions running high, Tessa had the advantage. She was young, pretty, crying, and positioned as the victim of an unreasonable older man. So I did something that surprised all of them. I smiled. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I'm being unfair." Tessa blinked, clearly thrown by the sudden shift. "I think I'm just tired," I continued. "Work's been stressful, and I'm probably overreacting to normal growing pains. Why don't we plan a proper family dinner at the house this weekend? Give everyone a chance to start fresh." It was a retreat, but a strategic one, because I'd learned something important from Tessa's slip about taking over the house and her confusion about the breakfast delivery. She wasn't just planning to push me out. She was actively working to make it happen. And now I knew I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The nurses' station at General Hospital was exactly as busy as I'd expected at 8:20 a.m., shift change time, with night staff finishing up and day staff getting oriented. I approached the desk with Tessa's carefully prepared breakfast, looking for someone who could help me get it to Lumi. "Excuse me," I said to a nurse updating charts. "I'm looking for Lumi Ward. I have a breakfast for her from her daughter." The nurse, whose badge read Renee Park, charge nurse, looked up with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd handled thousands of requests from well-meaning family members. "Lumi's in the ward finishing her notes, but I can't allow outside food in patient areas without proper documentation. Hospital policy." "Of course. Could you make sure she gets it when she comes out?" Renee examined the foil-covered plate. "What's in it?" "Eggs Benedict with hollandaise sauce. Her daughter made it special." Something flickered across Renee's face, a moment of hesitation that I almost missed. "I'll see that she gets it," she said, but her tone had changed slightly. I thanked her and left for my medical appointment, assuming the breakfast delivery was taken care of. The lab work and tests took about 40 minutes. I was walking back through the hospital lobby around 9:15 when I heard it. A cry of distress from somewhere in the building, followed by the rapid sound of multiple people moving quickly down a corridor. Hospital emergencies weren't unusual, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the particular urgency in the voices, or the way several staff members were converging on the same area. I found myself following the sound, staying well back from whatever was happening. What I saw made my hands tremble, not from fear, but from a cold, crystallizing understanding of how close I'd come to being destroyed. Through the glass doors of the ward, I could see medical staff around a patient bed. Someone nearby was suddenly and severely ill. Another person was asking rapid-fire questions about what did she eat and when did symptoms start. And there, on a cart being wheeled away from the scene, was a foil-covered plate that looked exactly like the one I'd delivered less than an hour earlier. "Excuse me?" Renee Park appeared at my elbow, her expression grim. "You're the man who brought the breakfast for Lumi Ward?" "Yes. Is everything okay? We need to talk." She led me to a small office off the main corridor, closing the door behind us. "The patient who became ill consumed food from the plate you brought. We need to know exactly what was in it and who prepared it." My mouth went dry. "Is the patient okay?" "She's stable, but she had a severe reaction to something. Food poisoning, allergic reaction. We're not sure yet. What we do know is that she ate food brought from outside the hospital, which violates our policies for exactly this reason. I didn't give food directly to any patient. I left it at the nurse's station for Lumi." Renee's expression softened slightly. "I know. But there was a miscommunication. The plate was labeled for Lumi, but when she didn't come out for it, another staff member offered it to Mrs. Merrickson, who was complaining about being hungry. Mrs. Merrickson thought it was from the hospital kitchen." The room felt like it was tilting. "What kind of reaction did she have?" "Severe gastric distress, elevated heart rate, disorientation. She's responding to treatment, but if she'd had certain underlying conditions, this could have been much worse." I sat down heavily in the chair across from Renee's desk. "We have protocols for outside food precisely because we can't control preparation methods, ingredients, or contamination," she continued. "I should have been more clear about that when you brought it. The person who prepared it," I started, then stopped, because something was crystallizing in my mind, a pattern I'd been too trusting to see. "Yes?" "She knew her mother worked here. She knew the policies. And she insisted I bring the food even when I said I couldn't eat it myself." Renee leaned forward. "Are you suggesting the food was deliberately contaminated?" "I don't know, but I'm starting to think I was set up to be blamed for whatever happened." We sat in silence for a moment while the implications settled. "There will be an incident report," Renee said finally. "Your name is already in it as the person who brought the food. Hospital administration will want to interview you." "Of course. But for what it's worth," she added, "you followed reasonable protocols. You didn't try to bring food into patient areas, you didn't misrepresent what it was, and you were honest about who prepared it." After she took my full statement, I walked slowly back to my truck, my mind racing. The breakfast that Tessa had insisted on making, despite knowing I couldn't eat it. Her resistance when I offered to take it to Lumi. Her confusion at dinner about whether Lumi had actually received it. Her slip about taking over the house. And now a hospital incident with my name attached to it, involving food that she had prepared and insisted I deliver. I sat in the hospital parking lot for a long time, staring at my phone. I could call Evan, explain what had happened, try to get ahead of whatever story Tessa would inevitably tell. Or I could do something smarter. I could start documenting everything. Because if Tessa was willing to use a sick hospital patient as collateral damage in her campaign to discredit me, then I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. And I had a feeling it was going to get much worse before it got better. The first thing I did when I got home was document everything. Timestamps, conversations, witness names. 23 years in construction had taught me that when something goes wrong, the person with the best documentation wins. Hospital Incident Report. Filed 9:47 a.m. Patient Mrs. Merrickson. Food poisoning suspected. Outside food brought by Jared Ravel for Lumi Ward. Prepared by Tessa Ward. My medical appointment. Time-stamped confirmation of required fasting. Lab tests completed. No food consumed. The breakfast conversation. Witnesses Evan Ravel and Tessa Ward, approximately 7 a.m. Tessa insisting I eat despite knowing about medical requirements. I was still writing when Evan and Tessa came home around 6 p.m. I heard them in the kitchen, their voices low but urgent. "Can't believe he would blame you for... Told you he's been looking for reasons to... Maybe we should consider other options." I walked into the kitchen, and the conversation stopped abruptly. "How did your test go, Dad?" Evan asked, but his tone was careful, like he was talking to someone who might explode. "Fine. Results in a few days." I opened the refrigerator, keeping my voice casual. "Interesting day at the hospital, though." Tessa went very still. "Oh?" "Someone got food poisoning from a breakfast that got mixed up with hospital food service. Poor woman was really sick." "That's terrible," Tessa said, but she was watching me with laser focus. "Do they know what caused it?" "Still investigating. They're interviewing everyone who brought outside food into the building today." Evan frowned. "Outside food? But hospitals don't allow that, do they?" "Exactly," I said, meeting Tessa's eyes. "Which makes it strange that someone would insist on sending food there, don't you think?" The silence stretched just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. "Well," Tessa said finally, "I hope they figure out what happened. Food safety is so important." Over the next few days, I quietly began building my case. I visited the county housing office to understand the legal difference between a guest and a resident, learned about notice requirements, tenant rights, and the proper procedures for asking someone to leave your home. I stopped by the bank to review my mortgage, property taxes, and homeowner's insurance, made sure all the documentation clearly showed sole ownership. I had a casual conversation with my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who mentioned how much noise had been coming from my house lately. "Lots of cars, music until late, people I don't recognize," she said. "Not complaining, just noticed the change." I started keeping a log of household expenses. Groceries, utilities, maintenance. Cross-referenced it with what Evan and Tessa were contributing. The numbers were illuminating. Most importantly, I began paying attention to the stories Tessa was telling. To Evan, "Your dad seems really stressed lately. Maybe the house is becoming too much for him to handle." To her friends, overheard during one of their impromptu gatherings, "We're trying to help him transition to something more manageable. It's hard when older people get set in their ways." To Lumi, during a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear, "I'm worried about Evan's relationship with his father. There's so much tension, and Jared seems to resent any changes." Each story painted me as the problem, aging, inflexible, unable to adapt to reasonable changes. Each story positioned her as the caring, patient young woman trying to help everyone navigate a difficult situation. It was masterfully done. If I reacted with anger, I'd confirm the unreasonable old man narrative. If I defended myself, I'd sound paranoid and defensive. If I did nothing, the stories would become accepted truth. But Tessa had made one crucial mistake. She'd involved the hospital. Because now there was an official record with timestamps and witness statements that proved she deliberately sent potentially contaminated food to a place where sick people could consume it. And she'd used me as the delivery mechanism, ensuring that if anything went wrong, I'd be the one facing consequences. That wasn't the behavior of someone who cared about my well-being or wanted what was best for the family. That was the behavior of someone willing to harm innocent people to achieve her goals. And once I understood that, everything else became clear. The pressure campaign at home wasn't about making things more comfortable for everyone. It was about making me so miserable that I'd leave voluntarily. The stories about my age and inflexibility weren't casual observations. They were laying groundwork for a narrative where my removal from the house was actually a kindness. The breakfast incident wasn't a miscommunication. It was a test run for attaching my name to problems that could justify more drastic action. I spent that weekend putting together a comprehensive timeline. Every conversation, every incident, every gradual escalation. The pattern was undeniable once you knew what to look for. Sunday evening, I got a text message in the family group chat that Tessa had created. "Family dinner tomorrow night. We need to settle the living situation once and for all." I stared at that message for a long time. Settle the living situation. She was making her final move, which meant it was time for me to make mine. Monday evening came with the tension of an approaching storm. I spent the day at work operating crane lifts, but my mind was on the conversation waiting at home. Caleb noticed my distraction during the lunch break. "You all right, Jared? You seem wound up about something." "Family stuff," I said. "Nothing I can't handle." "You need backup, you call. Don't let anyone push you around in your own house." Caleb's words stayed with me as I drove home. Don't let anyone push you around in your own house. Simple advice that had somehow become revolutionary. I arrived to find Tessa had transformed my dining room into what looked like a mediation session. Legal pads, printed documents, even a laptop open to what appeared to be real estate listings. "Jared," she called brightly. "Perfect timing. I've been doing research on downsizing options for you." Downsizing options, for me, in my own home. Evan was already seated at the table, looking uncomfortable but resigned. Lumi arrived a few minutes later, still in her scrubs from the day shift. "Thanks for coming, Mom," Tessa said, giving Lumi a hug that seemed more performative than affectionate. "I thought it would be good to have a neutral perspective on the family situation." Neutral perspective. As if Lumi wasn't Tessa's mother. As if she hadn't been fed a steady diet of stories about my unreasonableness and resistance to change. We sat around my dining table, the table I'd bought when Evan was 10, where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where I'd helped him with homework and listened to his dreams about the future. "So," Tessa began, consulting her notes like a corporate presenter, "I've been thinking about how to make this transition easier for everyone." "What transition?" I asked. "Well, your transition to a more appropriate living situation. I found some really nice senior communities. I'm 48. And some lovely condos that would be much more manageable. I don't want to manage less. I want to manage my own home." Tessa's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "I understand change is hard, Jared, but we have to think about what's best for everyone." Everyone? The family unit. Evan and I are planning a future together, and this house is perfect for our needs. You'd be so much happier somewhere without all the maintenance and upkeep. Lumi shifted uncomfortably. "Tessa, this is Jared's house. He gets to decide." "Of course," Tessa interrupted smoothly. "But sometimes people need help seeing their options clearly, especially when they're under stress." Under stress. Another subtle dig at my mental state. "What kind of stress?" I asked. Tessa exchanged a meaningful look with Evan. "Well, there was that incident at the hospital. Mom told me someone got very sick from food that got mixed up somehow." The room went quiet. Lumi was frowning, clearly trying to remember what she'd told Tessa about the incident. "Yes," I said calmly. "Someone got food poisoning from a breakfast that was brought to the hospital by an outside person." "That's terrible," Tessa said. "I hope whoever was responsible feels awful about putting a patient at risk." The words were sympathetic, but the implication was clear. I was responsible, and I should feel awful. "Actually," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I have some documentation about that incident that might interest everyone." I placed the hospital incident report on the table. Tessa's face went pale. According to this official report, the food in question was prepared by Tessa Ward and delivered to the hospital by Jared Ravel, who was fasting for medical tests and could not consume the food himself. Lumi leaned forward to read the report. Her expression grew darker with each line. The report also notes that the person who prepared the food was aware that outside food was not typically allowed in hospital settings, but insisted on having it delivered anyway. "That's not—" Tessa started, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. The timeline shows that the food was delivered at 8:20 a.m., the patient became ill at approximately 9 a.m., and hospital staff noted that the symptoms were consistent with either food contamination or an allergic reaction to an undisclosed ingredient." I placed a second document on the table. "This is my medical record from that morning, showing that I was required to fast, and that I complied with that requirement. Time-stamped and witnessed. Evan was staring at the papers with growing confusion. Tessa, you told me Dad refused to eat the breakfast because he was being stubborn. That's not exactly what I said. You said he was being difficult about the food you'd made specially for him. Tessa's composure was cracking. You're twisting my words. I was just trying to do something nice. For who? Lumi's voice was sharp. You sent food to my workplace that made a patient sick. You used Jared as the delivery person so he'd be blamed if anything went wrong. And now you're sitting in his house telling him he needs to move out? Mom, you don't understand the whole situation. Then explain it to me. Lumi's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years dealing with people in crisis. Explain to me why you prepared food for someone you knew couldn't eat it, insisted they take it to a hospital where you knew it wasn't allowed, and then used the resulting incident as evidence that they're not capable of managing their own life. The silence was deafening. Evan was looking at Tessa like he'd never seen her before. Is that what happened? Did you set Dad up? That's ridiculous. I would never. Then why? I said quietly. When I offered to take the breakfast to your mother, did you try to stop me? Why did you suggest putting it in the refrigerator instead? I was just. And why, when we had dinner at Romano's, did you seem confused about whether your mother had received the food? I don't remember. And why did you slip and mention taking over the house payments before catching yourself? Each question hit like a hammer blow. Tessa's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. Evan, she said desperately, you can't believe I would do something like that. But Evan was staring at her with dawning recognition. The breakfast thing. You've been talking about that all week. How Dad rejected your gesture, how it was part of a pattern of him being difficult. Because it was. But he was fasting for medical tests. You knew that. And instead of understanding, you used it as an example of why he's unreasonable. Tessa reached for Evan's hand, but he pulled away. How many other things have you reframed like that? He asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge, because once you started looking for the pattern, it was impossible to miss. I stood up slowly, walked to the front door, and opened it. Tessa, I said calmly, you have until Friday to remove your belongings from my home. After that, anything left here will be considered abandoned property. She shot to her feet. You can't just kick me out. I have rights. Actually, you don't. You're not a tenant. You're not on the lease. You don't pay rent. And you've been here less than 4 months. Legally, you're a guest who's overstayed her welcome. I placed one final document on the table. This is a formal notice to vacate, prepared according to state law. You've been served. Tessa turned to Evan with tears in her eyes. Are you going to let him do this to me? Evan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the documents on the table. Then he looked at his mother, who was sitting in stunned silence. I think, he said slowly, you should pack your things. Tessa's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, calculation, and finally, cold fury. Fine, she said, but don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake this is. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back for one final shot. You'll regret this, Jared. All of you will. The door slammed behind her, leaving the three of us in silence. After a moment, Lumi spoke. Jared, I owe you an apology. I had no idea she was manipulating the situation like that. You couldn't have known. Evan was still staring at the documents on the table. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have seen what was happening. You're not the first person to be manipulated by someone you cared about. Won't be the last either. But I chose her over you, in my own father's house. I sat back down at the table, suddenly feeling very tired. You chose what you thought was right based on the information you had. That's all any of us can do. How did you figure it out? I thought about that for a moment. The hospital incident was too convenient, too perfectly set up to make me look irresponsible while giving her ammunition for the "he's not capable" narrative. Once I saw that pattern, everything else became clear. Lumi shook her head. I can't believe she was willing to put a patient at risk just to score points against you. That's what made me realize how dangerous she really was. Someone who'll use sick people as collateral damage isn't going to stop at emotional manipulation. We sat in silence for a while, processing what had just happened. Finally, Evan spoke. What happens now? I looked around my dining room, my home, my space, my sanctuary, that I'd almost lost to someone who saw it as just another asset to acquire. Now, I said, we remember that family isn't about control or manipulation or managing each other toward predetermined outcomes. It's about respect, honesty, and caring about each other's actual well-being. Think she'll really leave by Friday? She'll leave because now she knows that I documented everything, that I understand her methods, and that I'm willing to use legal channels to protect myself. The game only works when the target doesn't realize they're playing. Lumi stood up and gave me a hug. Thank you for bringing me that breakfast, even though it caused so much trouble. It helped me see who my daughter really is. After they left, I sat alone at my dining table, looking at the legal documents and incident reports spread across the surface. My hands weren't trembling anymore. 3 months later, I was having coffee in my kitchen when Evan knocked on the front door, his own front door, which he'd started using again instead of just walking in. Morning, Dad. How's the coffee? Strong. Want some? Yeah. We sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where I'd been working on a new garden bed. Heard from Tessa? I asked. She texted a few times the first month, Evan said, mostly telling me I'd made a huge mistake and would realize it eventually. Then, nothing. Any regrets? He thought about it. About the relationship? No. Once I started looking for the patterns you pointed out, I saw them everywhere. I regret how long it took me to notice. That's how learning usually works. Speaking of consequences, he added, Lumi asked me to tell you the hospital updated their policies after the incident. Better screening, clearer documentation. That's good, I said. At least something useful came out of it. We drank our coffee in silence. Outside, Mrs. Patterson was working in her garden and waved when she saw us. Dad? Yeah? Thanks for not giving up on me, even when I was being foolish. I looked at him more carefully. He seemed older somehow, more grounded. You weren't being foolish, I said. You were being human. Most people want to believe the people they care about mean well. But you saw through it. I'd had more experience with people trying to take things that didn't belong to them. Construction teaches you to watch for that. But the hospital incident was what made it clear. Someone who truly cares about family wouldn't risk innocent people just to score points. Evan nodded. Think I'll spot it next time? You'll spot different things. Manipulation always looks a little different. Comforting. Realistic. Later, he helped me carry lumber to the backyard for a deck repair. We talked about ordinary things, work, plans, repairs, rebuilding the easy rhythm we'd had before everything went wrong. That evening, while I was grilling burgers, my phone rang. Unknown number. Jared, this is Renee Park from the hospital. I wanted to update you on the investigation. How's Mrs. Merrickson? She's fully recovered, but we identified the cause of the reaction. The food contained shellfish extract. Mrs. Merrickson has a documented shellfish allergy, information accessible to hospital staff. I sat down hard on the back steps. So it wasn't accidental. We can't prove intent, she said carefully. But whoever prepared that food knew exactly what would trigger a reaction. We believe you may have been used without realizing it. After the call, I sat watching the sunset for a long time, thinking about how close I'd come to losing my home, my relationship with my son, and my peace of mind to someone willing to put a patient at risk just to discredit me. My hands shook, not with fear, but gratitude. Gratitude that I trusted my instincts. Gratitude that I documented everything. Gratitude that I didn't back down. The next morning, I deleted Tessa's number and removed her from the family group chat she'd created. Then I made myself breakfast, eggs Benedict with hollandaise sauce, prepared safely in my own kitchen, eaten at my own table, in my own home. It tasted like victory.